good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to the latest edition of ACSA and Craft Spirits Magazine's Craft Spirits Roundtable. I'm Jeff Cialetti, and I'm editor-in-chief of Craft Spirits Magazine, and I'll be your moderator today. Craft Spirits Magazine is the American Craft Spirits Association's bi-monthly digital magazine, and it is the unparalleled resource for in-depth insight and intelligence for the entire craft spirits universe. The magazine features the information and analysis that small independent spirits producers and allied businesses need to operate in today's complex craft beverage market. And today we're going to focus on some of those independent producers that have integrated some unconventional vegetable ingredients into their products. Before I introduce them, I just have a few housekeeping items. We very enthusiastically invite your questions for our panelists today. If you have a question, please write it in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of your questions either at some natural break in the program or in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. You might notice that you've been muted on entry and your video function has been disabled. We ask that you remain on mute for the duration and communicate only through the chat function. And if you want to revisit today's program or recommend it to others, it'll be archived at both AmericanCraftSpirits.org and craftspiritsmag.com in the coming days. Now let's meet our panel. First up is David Bly, founder of Festif Amaro. David's a Montreal native who brought a great deal of Canadian influence into the creation of Festif Amaro and Festif Choux, the latter of which we'll discuss in detail today, as one of its signature ingredients is Brussels sprouts. David developed a deep appreciation for the Amaro category during his 2 decades working in the bar scenes of both New York and LA, and LA is where he's currently based. Next up is John O'Connor, who's co-founder and COO of Long Road Distillers in Grand Rapids, Michigan. John and his business partner, Kyle Van Streen, founded Long Road upon the belief that world-class spirits could be crafted by taking advantage of the abundant agricultural resources and diversity found in West Michigan. And one of those resources is asparagus, which you'll hear about today as the key ingredient in Long Road's asparagin. And finally, we welcome Alexander Zhdanov. Aleks Zhdanov is the head distiller and co-founder of 3BR Distillery in Keyport, New Jersey. The unconventional Soviet-inspired distillery, which Aleks co-founded with his twin brother Max, specializes in pea-based spirits and other unusual spirits. Aleks draws inspiration from his grandfather, who moonshined for his whole neighborhood during the Soviet prohibition, using peas as part of his sugar source. But they can do a lot better job introducing themselves and their spirits than I can, so I'm going to hand it over to them to tell us a little bit more. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order, and we'll start with Aleks. Go ahead, Aleks.
Hi, everybody. As you said, my name's Aleks. I'm one of the founders and the head distiller at 3BR Distillery. So as Jeff said, my grandfather in the Soviet Union was using peas as his sugar source, and I thought that was super fascinating. So I opened a distillery kind of as a way to honor him and what he was doing. But it kind of slowly morphed a little bit into, an experimental distillery where I'm constantly making really weird, interesting things, a lot of which is from the fact that the farmers themselves have now started reaching out to me, being like, I have a bunch of this, or I have a bunch of this. And now I've made over 45 different spirits at this point, spirits and liqueurs. So in 4.5 years. So it's been a lot of fun and some really cool things.
Cool. Thanks, Aleks. And now we'll hear from John.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, John O'Connor, Long Road Distillers. We're based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Fortunate to be in Michigan. We're the second most agriculturally diverse state in the union, next to California, in terms of the number of agricultural products that we grow for commercial use. And our distillery just founded on the idea, Long Road, that we don't take shortcuts, that if we put something in a bottle, we crafted it 100% from grain or fruit or raw input to glass. That also transitions into some of the other products that we make. We wild forage a lot of stuff. for a variety of products we make and try to celebrate and highlight Michigan agricultural diversity as much as we can in the things that we do.
Cool. And David, you're up.
Hey guys, I'm David Bly. I make Festif Amaro and Festif Shoe. Originally from Canada, and I've been in the bar world bartending for about 20 years and longtime fan of Amaro and was doing some hobby batches prior to the pandemic. Real lo-fi start to this endeavor, but just when all bar work shut down, just turned the hobby into a real passion and got a bunch of tanks and started scaling up. And it all started with just trying to incorporate as many Canadian ingredients as possible from back home in Montreal and Quebec and the surrounding area. From a farmer's market in Montreal where I found some really nice Brussels sprouts. So yeah, just been a big proponent of spreading the Amaro love around California, and it's starting to really pop off now, which is really nice. But it's been a fun journey to go from small batch to now just opening up our own distillery space the last few months. So it's been a pretty crazy trajectory over the last 2 years.
All right. Thanks, David. And so now you're all on this panel because you use vegetables in different formats, either as the flavor component in a liqueur, as a gin botanical, or as the base for the distillate itself. So we should have some pretty diverse insights from all of you today. So the first thing I want to talk about is sourcing. And David, where do your Brussels sprouts come from? What was involved in finding the right source? And what's that sort of supply chain process like procuring them?
Yeah, great. Well, initially it was from just Quebec Brussels sprouts. So I have two different formats that are incorporated into Festive Choux. Choux, by the way, is the French word for Brussels sprouts, choux de Bruxelles. So I macerate them in both raw and dehydrated fashion. So I have a bunch of Quebec Brussels sprouts that are dehydrated in Montreal that I use in the batch. And the fresh stuff I usually source from farms and farmers markets, et cetera, around California. So it's sort of two different supply chains. Dehydrating as many as possible when I'm going back to Montreal. I'm going back this week and I'm going to be dehydrating a bunch of as many Brussels sprouts as I can find. But yeah, it's getting them in California from farmers markets and macerating them raw as soon as I get them because they don't really keep. There's no way to store them. So it's pretty much getting them right before I start the batch. So yeah.
All right. Similar question for you, John, but about asparagus.
Yeah, so we, in Michigan, we are the #1 asparagus growing state in the country. And when we got this idea, that was part of the reason is that Michigan is the asparagus capital of the world. There's a town called Hart, Michigan, on the west side of the state along Lake Michigan. They have the National Asparagus Festival every year. We had this idea. We reached out to actually the Michigan has an asparagus association. So we reached out to the Asparagus Association. They connected us with a number of asparagus farmers here in the state. We ended up working with a farm called Golden Stock Farms in Mears, Michigan, which is just a few miles from Hart. Family farm and growing asparagus for a long time. And they were super excited about it. In fact, they said, whatever you make with this, I hope it's better than the only other alcoholic product that was made with asparagus from our farm, which was an asparagus wine that they said was terrible and no one should ever make again. And so the asparagus obviously being a spring crop, they harvested the asparagus on a Friday morning, toted it up and delivered it to us on a Saturday morning, and we had the asparagus in a tank macerating with high proof neutral grain spirit that we make in house that same day. And so just that first cutting of asparagus, if you've ever grown asparagus, the first cutting is absolutely the best asparagus. It's the most tender and juicy and ripe and has the best flavor. And so we were able to take advantage of the asparagus, just right from the farm, as fresh as possible.
All right, and Aleks, you use a hell of a lot of peas. How do you get your hands on those?
So yeah, I use two different sources of peas, and actually my source of them has recently changed or is about to change as well. So I use malted and unmalted peas. The malted peas have to obviously be fresh at some point so that they can get malted. So I previously I worked with a farm in Nebraska, but I just found a farm in New Jersey to kind of bring the source closer to grow the peas for me. And I get them malted at Rabbit Hill Farms in Shiloh, New Jersey. It's the only malt house in New Jersey. And yeah, they were so thrilled. They were like, "What? Malting peas? That's awesome." Um, but yeah, that I think there's a question about that a little later on anyway, but uh, the other source of peas I have is in is in France actually. So France apparently is one of the biggest growers of peas in the world, and that's where I was getting my other source of unmalted peas. Because peas are a little bit difficult to use. The gelatinization temperature is higher than the boiling point of water, so it's really hard to actually get all those sugars out of the peas. So I actually use a pre-gelatinized pea flake that this one company in New Jersey is producing in France. Um, but basically, those are almost like instant mashed potatoes with peas. And that just saves me hours of boiling and trying to get all the potential sugars out of the peas themselves. And yeah,
And Alex, how do you store them? Like, how long can they be stored for? Is there freezing involved? Is it?
yeah. So that's the interesting part is once they're pre-gelatinized as a flake, they're pretty much good indefinitely. And in general, peas have always been something that is like super shelf stable. I mean, I would say probably not indefinitely. There's probably degradation over time, some spoilage, but definitely not like instantly like the other two, David and John, with for like the peak flavor. They're good for months, if not years. The malted peas are also once they get malted, they're pretty shelf stable as well. So yeah, luckily from that perspective, I can have a little bit of lead time and holding inventory for a little bit.
All right, John. Anything we need to know about storing asparagus?
No, I mean, like I said, we only made this product one time this spring, and it was yeah, like I said, we took advantage of as fresh a product as we could the day we got it, so we didn't have to store it for very long.
And David, you mentioned that you pretty much make it right as soon as you get the Brussels sprouts.
For the
Have you
fresh stuff.
stored any before, or you just go right into the maceration?
The fresh stuff goes right into maceration. The process of breaking down the Brussels sprouts is the most laborious vegetable to break apart, and I regret the inspiration every time I'm making a batch because it's basically just peeling every leaf off, which is somehow I'm scaling, but it's I'm desperately looking for some inventor who's creating a tool to separate some Brussels sprout leaves. But the dehydrated version of the Brussels sprouts, that's shelf stable. So it brings like a slightly different property of like a caramelized, almost sweeter, nuttier note to the Amaro as opposed to the fresh, which is a bit more peppery and citrusy and bitter. So the dehydrated version, making as much as possible because with the shelf stability, it could sort of just like deepen that caramelized nuttiness to it. So those get stored and they've been lasting for quite some time now, so it's great.
So, David, let's go a little more into your process for making it. Um, you know, from harvesting to maceration to
Mhm.
uh, till it gets into the bottle.
Yeah. I mean, it's always fascinating for me to listen to and talk to distillers because the process is so fascinating, and it's something that I don't really have any. Um, I don't use any of the distilling process in my own facility because it's just maceration. It's just the rectifying process for Amaro. Um, and so I'd be fascinated to see what the Brussels sprout can do in sort of a distillate. But for us, it's preparing the dried and the fresh botanicals. And the way I explain Amaro to so many people is it's just alcoholic tea, right? It's steeping the botanicals in a high proof spirit the way you would making tea, and then you're proofing it down with water and sweetener with the same botanicals. You're sort of transferring the botanicals. So the Brussels sprouts just get moved from a high proof grain spirit into water and making two separate liquids essentially that you're going to then blend. And when it's macerated with all these other wonderful ingredients, and we use a lot of other great like Canadian Boreal botanicals like Quebec spruce tips and balsam fir from northern Quebec and eastern white cedar from a reservation in northern Ontario. All of that together just makes a really lovely, different type of Fernet than most people have ever tried. And I think the Brussels sprout thing is sort of a weird thing for people to hear, but it really is so faint. There's such a faint aroma or flavor profile to it in the Amaro. So it's really just a basic maceration and then proofing down with the water. And you've got a lot of filtration happening afterwards just because of some of the botanicals like aloe ferox, which is just a powder, and some rhubarb root. And it gets kind of cloudy. So we do a lot of filtration. And then it's bottled, and it's just a weird, kinky Brussels sprout fernet that people can then bring to friends and be like, "You've never tried this before, so let's do it."
Great. And similar question for Aleks. You know, you mentioned both malted and unmalted peas. Uh, Tell me what the malting process is like for that. Is it similar to that of grain? And then also, how's the fermentation process? Anything you had to do to kind of dial that in?
Sure. So when I was first starting out, especially since I mean, my grandfather wasn't malting peas. He was doing a different process than me. Not entirely. It was very much inspired by what my grandfather was doing, but I tell everyone I'm a hipster, so I wanted to make it 100% peas. He was still adding some sugar for the fermentation side because, as I said, it's a very difficult grain to work with. So when I started doing that, I was like, I can go a step further. I can start exploring the concept of malting as well. I theorized because peas were high in protein, that they should have a lot of the enzymes that are also within barley. Comparatively to other grains, barley being higher in protein, and a lot of those enzymes are kind of mixed in with that. So I theorized that, and for a little while, I was actually malting peas in-house, but without the option of actually, you know, kilning them and drying them out. That was extremely difficult because the shelf life on a freshly green malt, um, yeah, pea is pretty much just like a couple hours from like the peak to when basically anything and everything wants to live on it, because it's just so like nutrition dense basically. So for a while I was, malting in house, and having to do basically not having a choice and having to use it almost immediately. And from the standpoint of malting too, something interesting is that it malts so much faster than a grain as well. So when I was experimenting, when I was doing it myself, I was reading about barley taking, at this point, I'm trying to remember, it's like almost like a week, 5 to 7 days or something like that, maybe a little longer. And then I was getting basically malted peas in, a couple of days instead, because I guess they would hydrate faster and then they would grow faster. Again, another reason why our vodka is called Mendel is uh, Gregor Mendel used them for genetic studies because peas grow so quickly. So that was kind of interesting of a process to learn, and I was so happy though when the malt house took over that malting for me and made it shelf stable, and since then I actually even worked with a couple of breweries that were like, now that it's not basically instantaneously going bad, we can now use it for a beer experiment. But so basically, I make. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. I basically make three products with the peas. I do a vodka. I do our Gorovka, which is an aged spirit, and I make the gin as well from that vodka base. But the process for the vodka and the Gorovka are very similar. The first distillation, the stripping distillation, and then the second distillation is where things get a little bit different. The vodka obviously needs to be distilled to 95%. So that process is very similar to how a typical vodka is done. Um, but and then the Gorovka is because it's an aged spirit, I wanted as much flavor as possible. So that process is closer to how a brandy or a whiskey is made. So lower proof at distillation, kind of not a full pot distillation, more like a short column distillation on that, and just way more flavor and then aged. So and then the gin, or I'm going to talk a little bit later, is my savory gin, made with garlic, chives, porcini mushrooms, super delicious as well. But I basically leaned into that vegetable earthy quality of the vodka itself to make that.
All right. And John, asparagus and gin, how does that behave? And, working with it as a botanical, tell me about the trial and error process there. You said it's only the first time you made it. So how did you dial in that recipe?
Yeah, it really took about 3 years for us to get the recipe right. Trying to use the asparagus season is pretty short in Michigan, only about 30 days of growing season. So, we started, just trialing it as like a lot of things that we do in the gin world. We do single botanical distillations just to experiment with different flavors and how they react, whether it's in liquid distillation or it's a vapor distillation. And we tried roasting the asparagus first versus the fresh asparagus. And ultimately, we leaned into the fresh asparagus. We tried a couple different junipers. We used a lot of commercial juniper for a couple of our gins in house, but we also have a gin called Michigan, where we go to Beaver Island, which is the largest island in Lake Michigan, every year with my team, and we wild forage juniper on the island. And so we ended up using the Michigan, the Beaver Island juniper as the gin for this. It's a little softer, a little woodier, a little more cedary notes to the juniper flavor. And we really thought about it, and it can be kind of polarizing to people, but thinking about the flavor profile of vegetables in gin, thinking more leaning towards the Bloody Mary, the Bloody Caesar type drink, or the a dirty martini kind of flavor. And so then, just thinking about other flavors that worked with asparagus. We used the flavor Bible a lot in both front of house and back of house, just thinking about what pairs with flavors, what accents the flavors of one fruit or vegetable or botanical for another. So we ultimately landed on the Beaver Island juniper, asparagus, fresh lemon peel, black pepper, tarragon, and chive as the flavor profile. So it is a very savory gin, but it leans into that style that works well in those more savory type drinks like a Bloody Mary or a dirty martini or things of that nature. Did a really great drink with the tomato water. That was almost like a clarified Bloody Mary with some. We had some fresh ramps that we had foraged for us in the spring. So we had made pickled ramps, and we used some of the pickled ramp brine in the cocktail as well.
Yum.
So I wanted to ask each of you, how much of the respective vegetables go into a batch. So John, how much asparagus are you using in a batch? How does that translate per bottle?
Yeah, we made about 125 9-liter cases of asparagus this year, and I believe that was like 300 pounds of asparagus went into that batch.
Cool. And David, how about you with the Brussels sprouts?
Last batch we did was about 1,800 bottles. It was about 35 pounds of fresh uh, Brussels sprouts, and then Probably double that to get to about like 2,000 grams. What is that? It's about like
Uh,
eight,
about
seven, 8, 10
4 or
pounds.
5 pounds, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, so to get just the dehydrated, so using a lot more for the dehydrated, but yeah, about 35 and about 75, 80 pounds for the dried.
Cool. And Alex, ease.
So my interesting thing with it, because it's my fermentation source, I didn't really know what to expect in terms of yield. But actually my yield isn't too terrible considering pound wise. I use about 660-ish pounds of peas for a 400-gallon batch. And I'm getting roughly 215 bottles out of that. So just about 3 pounds of peas per bottle, which is honestly not terrible. So yeah,
And since you mentioned it earlier, garlic, you put it in one of your gins. I want to know how that process worked, how much you used, and what that brought to the table.
yeah. So like I said before, I wanted to do something. Funnily enough, I wanted to basically kind of have a little bit of an FU to classic gin. Like when I first opened, since then I've made a couple of different gins, but at the beginning I was like, you know what, I don't know if I need a classic gin for our bar program. Instead, how far can I get from gin and still legally call it gin? So I decided to go as savory as possible, using kind of some of the botanicals that I would picture being Soviet a little bit, things that I grew up with, eating and, seeing. So that's why I used garlic, chives, porcini mushrooms, dill, thyme, eucalyptus, and black currant. So it ended up, being extremely savory. The garlic comes through. Well, interestingly enough, uh, what I get as a response from a lot of people is some people will be like, wow, the garlic really comes through. And other people are like, wow, the mushroom really comes through. And some people are like, the chives really come through. I have almost a feeling that it's like mental, like whatever you're like more, reminiscent, or like whatever you're a little bit more familiar with, I guess, in your cooking or whatever, that usually comes through a little bit more. But for me, the garlic comes through the most. Um, Grew up eating just a ton of garlic. But yeah, the process is I've tried with fresh garlic, and I've tried with dry garlic from the store, like the garlic powder and all that stuff. Fresh just is so much better. It comes through just way cleaner, and just blends a little bit better with the other flavors. And you know it is, I think, off the top of my head, it is the highest other ingredient other than juniper in the gin itself. So it's pretty prevalent.
All right. Since the government is probably reopening this week, it's a good time to talk about regulatory approval. TTB, any issues getting these ingredients approved in your formulas? I know, David, you had previously used, I believe, a mushroom in yours that you weren't able to because the TTB, uh, didn't recognize it as a spirit ingredient. So tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of went down.
Yeah, that's more so for the Festif Amaro, the classic strain of Amaro, but it was a shaga mushroom, which is super common in like coffee drinks now and in food, and it's just a very common ingredient now. And we found like a supplier from Canada, and we were really excited about using it in the Amaro. I had
Oh,
used it in
my thing
every
off. You're good.
sorry. We had used it in every iteration of every recipe during the R&D phase, in the Amaro, and sometimes in the shoe. And then when we submitted the recipes to the TTB, every botanical came back okay from the GRAS list, and except for the shaga mushroom, they had just never had a spirit that had used it before. So they told us we could either go through the regulatory process or we could just scrap it. So this was about 2 weeks before I was about to launch my first batch ever of scaling up, and I had to reformulate the recipe, just make a mad dash, doing small little tincture batches of everything without the shaga mushroom and trying different things. And yeah, it was disheartening. And now I feel like I see shaga mushroom in every like coffee shop and restaurant. I'm like, what what happened? So I'm refreshing the TTB website, the GRAS list pretty regularly to see when it's going to be approved, so I can just try to bring it back in. But for the Brussels sprouts, they were like, "Yeah, go for it. You're weird, but go for it." So yeah.
Um, yeah. Any TTB challenges with the peas, Alex?
So nothing with peas. They seem to not be even that interested. Um, but yeah, I actually had a couple of similar situations with also mushrooms. I tried to make a reishi hazelnut cacao amaro, and they did not like reishi at all. They actually yeah, they came back. They said we have to get the FDA involved. The FDA was like, no. And it's really interesting the reasoning they gave too for that one. Because it is on the grass list for the most part, but apparently when it interacts with alcohol, it like creates some compound that's dangerous for pregnant women and children. Um, which is exactly who I'm trying to have as the main clientele for my alcohol. But apparently, yeah, I just couldn't do it.
John, you got any stories?
We tried to make an Iraq once, which is an anise flavored spirit, but a lot of the traditional Lebanese ones utilize mastic in the production of the Iraq, and so don't ever do it to your still. It's miserable. We had to get paint scrapers out to get the mastic out of the R&D still because it just gummed out. It's gum arabica, it like bonded to the bottom of the still. But yeah, they wouldn't approve the Iraq with mastic, but if you're able to buy any of the imported ones, so many of them have mastic as an ingredient in the ones that get imported from the Middle East. But they wouldn't approve ours with mastic in it.
All right. So let's move on to the fun part. How do you actually sell this stuff? So what's your pitch? How do you tell the story? How does that story differ from when you're talking, whether it's the trade, distributors, bars, retailers, versus when you're talking to consumers? So we'll ask John, what's your trade and consumer pitch? How do you respond when someone's like an asparagus gin?
Yeah, so I think asparagus as a flavor, as a vegetable, is probably fairly polarizing. People either love it or they hate it. And when we announced asparagine as a product we were putting into the world, we did the normal product launch scenario and did press releases and the media tour, and it was probably the single most engaged post we've ever done in 10 years of being in business in terms of the reaction we got from people. And which is really encouraging. It's okay to not make things for everybody. That's kind of our business model, is we like to make things that we like, and if you don't like them, it's okay. We don't have to. Probably have something else you can enjoy. And then just I think people, once they try it like the flavor of the asparagus is there. It's definitely prevalent. It's at the front. That it's asparagus by both the taste and the smell. And the I the reactions from people watching them take it their first sip of it is, it's incredible. They're like, "Wow, this is really interesting." Like, I think that's the worst thing anyone said was that was interesting. Like, the people that were absolutely head over heels in love with it, and then the worst thing you heard was, "Well, it's interesting. It might not be for me, but I get it. It makes sense, the flavor combination that you've created." Um, and then it's really fun to see, really leaning into the craft cocktail scene on premise is really where we found a lot of success. It certainly sold at retailers, especially up and down the lakeshore, in terms of, places that have an asparagus farm or an agricultural background. But seeing bartenders really gravitate towards it because it is unique and how they were able to like weave it into a cocktail.
All right. let's sorry, where was I? Oh yeah, Aleks, your pitch. Consumers versus trade. How do you sell that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of a learning curve there. I mean, the vodka, while I was just super excited about and all of that, and from the standpoint of vodka, I think it's one of the most interesting. It's vegetal, it's earthy, it has like a different type of flavor to it. People say it actually smells a little bit like tequila. I thought it was going to be like a home run. I was just like, oh my God, everybody's going to be so excited about this. Vodka's boring. It's definitely a little bit more of a tough sell, because people are very married to the idea of, flavorless, tasteless vodka, even though original Eastern European vodka was very much still had like the essence of flavor. Um, but it's very slowly, people are seeing the utility of it. It's it makes excellent dirty martinis because it's already almost dirty in taste, like it has like that vegetal flavor. Um but the more interesting one to me is our Gorovka, the aged spirit. That one, it's my favorite spirit. I can sit there and drink it all day, every day. It basically tastes almost like a liquid cigar, um, and like chocolatey coffee cigar, like tobacco, like flavor to it, which is definitely like very acquired. And that's more of a growing one, and the people either love it or hate it. But in my experience recently, actually, it's been a lot of people like really loving it. But from the standpoint of making it like a really mainstay, a product that I'm selling a lot of, I think there's going to be a little bit of time teaching people and having them try it and figure out how to do anything with it, because it's not the easiest to make cocktails with because the flavor's so strong, but you can definitely make some really good coffee inspired drinks with it. So we've done like a plantain old fashioned with it that worked super well. But yeah, it's a little bit hard when you make like something really weird to get people to really accept it. But I think it's worth the fun for me personally.
All right, David. Same thing, but with Brussels sprouts.
Yeah, I think just in general, also Amaro as a category, there's a lot of education involved when pitching it to either consumers or bars and restaurants. I think I'm a huge fan of the entire category, and I think there's a place for every single type of variation of Amaro. So I think some of the more historical brands tend to lean a bit sweeter, a bit more syrupy, which I love that there's a place for it all. I think some of the newer brands are sort of embracing the bitterness. And so this is definitely a thing to factor in when I'm talking to someone who's either had Amaro before, has never heard of Amaro before. It runs the gamut. So um, I think with respect to Festif Choux, I sort of when it comes to a bar or a restaurant that might be a little bit more familiar with Amaro, but maybe has the starter pack of Amaro brands like the Noninos, the Montenegros, the Avernas that are just sort of in that entry kit that a lot of bars have, rightfully so, sort of expressing the Brussels sprout component is a really fun, we don't have anything like that, is a helpful tool, but at the same time, leading into the fact that it is quite faint in the Fernet itself. There's some aroma, there's some flavor profile, but like John was saying, it's just there's so many other factors into it. I mean, we use 35 pounds in 300 cases, so it's just one of the components. So it's not really leaning too heavily on the Brussels sprout because you don't want to like make it seem like that's all there is. But when it comes to consumers, when I do tastings, I definitely end with that because I think people have this stigma in their mind, like Brussels sprouts, ooh, gross or whatever. But because it's so faint in the spirit, I talk more about the spruce tips and the balsam fir and the chamomile, which brings natural honeyness, and the rhubarb root, which brings a little smokiness that's signature for Fernets, and the green cardamom, which sort of like gives a little nice like nuttiness as well. And then mentioning Festif Choux, um, two words that a lot of people have trouble saying. I've heard festive chokes a lot, which I just have to take it as a someone who speaks French. But choux being the French word, ending the tasting with that and seeing people's eyes light up once they've already had a couple sips and they've gone on the journey and they're like, oh yeah, that it's definitely in there. It's sort of a mental game, like Aleks was saying. It's um, sort of guiding people along, but not just gauging their fear level for something new, which I think bars and restaurants are a bit more open to because they have just a wider net of spirits at their disposal versus someone maybe taking a bottle home and they only have space for about 4, 5, 6 bottles in their home. How do you make it seem like it's not going to be something they're only going to use once or twice?
All right. Since we mentioned cocktails briefly, I want to get some cocktail recommendations from each of you. What things go well with yours? David, since you were just talking, let's go with you.
Yeah, that picture right there is a dynamite espresso martini. Um, of the two SKUs that we have, the Amaro and the Choux, the Amaro is way more cocktail malleable because it's just a classic style of Amaro. But the Fernet, like Aleks was saying, with his respect to his spirits, the Choux is such a dominant flavor because of all the spruce tips and the green cardamom and the chamomile, etc., and the rhubarb root, that it's not as cocktail malleable, but with coffee drinks, it's incredible. So just with like a espresso concentrate or with like a classic espresso martini, just instead of vodka, sorry, to my fellow panelists, but uh, as just like a coffee liqueur and a fresh espresso, it is the best espresso martini I've ever had. And it was a couple of friends that came up with it out of nowhere. And now I'm just addicted and it's being served around a lot of places in LA. But yeah, I think it's used in some bars as like a alt for a chartreuse. That's never what I intended, but in sort of a gin or mezcal base with some choux, with some like also in variations that have like some celery juice and stuff. So it's just a very vegetal compliant spirit, veggie. I'm gonna just end that sentence before I even throw in too many other weird words. But yeah,
Veggie. John.
Yeah, like I said, I think you always got to go simple first and give people the gateway into doing this, especially for people that want to take it home. So we really definitely leaned into the martini and Bloody Mary type cocktails. Honestly, one of the ways we started enjoying it the most was just a very simple, like a Collins drink, or even with tonic. It was really surprisingly good with a really bitter tonic, and just a twist of lemon in there. Again, try to let the spirit stand on its own without having to hide it in something with a bunch of other flavors. Let the spirit be the star. I think that's one of my favorite ways for a variety of spirits that we make is how do you make the spirit stand out while making it approachable to the end user. And so, yeah, just leaning into some of the stuff that's more savory. We tried on some sweeter type drinks, but didn't have as much success. We definitely leaned into with some cucumber and dill drinks. We did a drink with some fresh cucumber that was also pretty delightful.
Cool. And now, Aleks, I know you mentioned a plantain old fashioned. That sounds pretty interesting. And you said you had some struggles with some other cocktails. What about is it good in a martini, or what about the garlic one too? Where does the garlic, the shishka, the gin go?
Yeah. Well, to kind of change that up a little bit. Not all of them are difficult to work with. The vodka actually is really surprisingly easy. The only thing, the caveat being, is that you will actually get character from the vodka in your final product. So that's a lot of bartenders think it's like really interesting because they'll make, even like a Cosmo, and it comes through as like a little bit vegetal, earthy, but it makes an excellent Cosmo. Um, the other two are a little bit more difficult. The aged spirit made from peas, like I said, that one makes like a good, old fashioned with plantain. We've done some coffee drinks with it. Uh, in my opinion, I think it's it makes excellent drinks, but it is a little bit more, you have to be in that specific mood because it also will come through in that final cocktail. The gin is probably the hardest one to make drinks with. It makes an incredible dirty martini. Thinking about from the perspective, it's basically like very briny and it's the garlic chives. Um, so it makes a really good dirty martini, but other drinks have been a little bit more interesting. So I think, in my opinion, one of the only successful sweet drinks we've made with it was we actually made a really cool tiki drink where the pineapple actually worked really, really well with that savory gin. That I think we called it the shish tiki because the shishka that's the name of the gin is. Um, that was actually classically one of my favorite drinks we've made. And that's just a weird mix of savory and sweet. But it's definitely doable, and I think from the perspective of like the user as well, of well, the consumer when they come in for cocktails here, that's how we can make something that they've absolutely never had before is flavors like those. And so that's maybe it'll be like maybe half the people are into it as on its own, but if you're really into that cocktail made with it, you're gonna remember it and you're gonna, want a bottle of it for yourself so you can make something like that at home.
I know that pineapple on pizza can be very polarizing, but pizza has garlic on it, so maybe there's something there.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the regular part. Now it's time for the Q and A, and I mean the audience Q and A, and I see we do have a few questions there. Let me just jump on some of those. Let's see. There was something related to the TTB situation. I think that was for David, and I think you answered it already in the chat. But just so everyone knows, the reasoning they said no to the mushroom just because it's not on the grass list. So that's really why, just because it had never been used before.
That specific type of mushroom. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, like porcini and is it reishi or reishi, that like that these other strains of mushrooms have been used in other spirits before, so they've gone through the regulatory process, but chaga mushroom had never been used. So it's purely, do you want to fund us going through this process and wait a couple months to a couple years for that ingredient to be approved? Great. If not, just scrap it. So I think it was well intentioned, but it was disheartening. So it was really just we've never dealt with it before. We can go through it, but it'll take time.
All
So
right,
I didn't have the time.
cool.
Yeah.
And sort of relatedly, Nicole Micheletti is asking, how do you go about lobbying for getting botanical approved with the TTB? Dreaming about using sumac and birch bark. Who wants to take this one?
So wait, I do know a little bit about this. So with the reishi mushroom, like I said before, I got denied. I at that point I was so committed to doing this. I actually started looking into how difficult it would be to go through that process, and it is not easy. It is. I went to a company that because they were like, you basically need to write like a dissertation basically
Mhm.
on why it is safe for for use, compiling a bunch of research, maybe doing your own research, and then release it as like a body of work that basically supports it. And I was like, huh, how, not how hard can it be, but I was like, I have a lot of PhD friends, maybe they can help me put something together. and we just started doing some of the preliminary work, and we were like, this is very, very prohibitive from our perspective, because we were just going to release like 150, 200 bottles of it, nothing crazy. But just like you, David, I actually I'm waiting until somebody actually releases something with reishi and alcohol, because that means they did the hard work of doing it,
Yeah.
and then I could finally release that product the way that I wanted to. And that's I keep checking on it, but yeah.
If I'm going to go through the process of getting published in a medical journal, it better be for something more valuable to the world than having shaga mushrooms being included in alcohol. It better be something more health related. Yeah.
There was also a question, I think this is more for Aleks because it was related to fermentation and yeast. Does that, using any vegetables, like in your case peas, does that really have any effect on what kind of yeast you use?
So I mean, I've done a bunch of different sugar source fermentations. Um, But in terms of vegetables specifically, trying to get those to ferment, I treated it basically as if it was a grain, because it's from the standpoint of like a sugar source, it's a starchy product that you have to convert the starch to sugar. So while it's not exactly the same, the starch like ratio is different. It's mostly amylose rather than amylopectin. I basically was like, you know what, it's probably similar enough, and so I just tried it with regular ale yeast, and that seemed to work. I actually had zero issues with fermentation. In fact, it's like a super fast 1.5 day fermentation for me, which compared to any of my other spirits, crazy fast. So I think I got lucky, but I would say if you're looking to ferment a vegetable, I would try to think of what it's closest to. Whether or not it's starchy, or inulin forward, like something like sunchokes, for example, like Jerusalem artichokes. I've seen some people do something with that. That's inulin forward. I've actually experimented with it a little as well. So I would maybe use like an agave yeast, because that's from the inulin for agave. So that's basically my bit of advice, is to kind of just see what it's similar to and use that.
Right. And another one related to on that fermentation question, is it just vegetable fermenting, or are there other sugar sources involved? I think you mentioned that there were a little bit of help there, right?
So on for me specifically for peas, it is 100% peas. So that's a little bit different than what my grandfather was doing. Like I said, he had some sugar, but it was worth it for me, so that specifically, so I wouldn't have people tell me that it's just a sugar shine with pea flavoring. I wanted it to be like there's no doubt in anyone's mind that it is sourced from peas, and that's what it's made from.
So I guess the malting then really does this more or less the same that malting grain does. It makes it more convertible.
Well, it's not even about the convertible factor on it. It does make, like, I basically count that all those pieces almost as a loss, because I don't think I'm going to get them hot enough. Those particular malted peas, because they're introduced at around 150 53 degrees, like a typical like grain malt. Um, at least that's what I do. That for me is I don't count those starches as being convertible. Maybe some of them just from the malting process, but it's more so to introduce the enzyme that converts the other starches to sugars. And I get roughly actually 10% malted to unmalted, and I'm getting full conversion from that, because that is a decent amount of enzyme content to it. But that doesn't mean I don't help it out a little bit with external enzymes. But I do know when I've tried it without that, it still worked at 10%.
Cool. So we're close to the top of the hour, so it's time to wrap things up. Just wanted to remind everybody to check out the latest issue of Craft Spirits Magazine. If you don't already receive it, head over to craftspiritsmag.com, sign up for a free digital subscription. Every other month, it'll pop up in your inbox. And finally, I'd just like to once again thank our amazing panelists, David, John, and Aleks. And I'd, of course, like to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. Our next Craft Spirits Roundtable is scheduled for December 2nd, and that one's going to be on rye whiskey. So I hope to see you then. And until then, enjoy the rest of your day.